I just heard Professor Sachs took a flight in last evening from New York, and he flies back this evening back to New York. So thank you for giving us your time. Really excited to have you with us, and you are the man of the moment, maybe possibly after President Trump. So great to have you. I was looking at some of the titles of your recent interviews. The Architects of War, Israel's Love for Chaos, The Decline of the West, and Collapse of the Global Economy. So today is going to be a very relaxing and positive evening in light of your various interviews. So geopolitics is on everyone's minds today, and while we all try and decipher the headlines, it's Professor Sachs who months before is able to advise and share what is going to happen and come up on the headlines. So we look forward to your insights this evening. And the theme today is India in the New World Order and Political Order. We have a room full of CEOs, diplomats, journalists, business leaders. So it's a great mix, and we're all very excited to hear you today. Okay, going to the main question in the room, and the one thing that's in everyone's mind, the US-Iran endgame. How do you see this conflict panning out? What are likely to be the main structural changes that would arise, which you may see as a permanent impact on the world?
Thank you so much for this evening and for starting with such a simple question. But it's really a great pleasure to be with you, Anand, and to be with Vicky, and to this is the 30th anniversary of that talk, or 31, and it's the 47th year of my visiting this wonderful country. And with my colleague Nirupam Bajpai, we've been working together for 32 years, which is wonderful. We had good meetings with government officials today, and now it's a privilege to be with you this evening. I'm most grateful. Well, this is, of course, a war that never should have happened. It's even too dignified to call it a war of choice. I would call it a war of whim, because this was not a war that was necessary, advisable, thought through, planned, or supported inside the United States. To put it bluntly, Israel has wanted the United States to wage this war for decades. I shouldn't say Israel, I should say Mr. Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister of Israel. When the war started, he said in a tweet, he wrote in a tweet, "This is my dream of 40 years." And I had to apologize to many people because I had been saying that it was his dream for 30 years, which I knew because he became Prime Minister 30 years ago. But I didn't know the pre-prime ministerial passion for war with Iran. This is something that has been in Netanyahu's head for a long time. It's a disastrous idea. Donald Trump bragged, if I could put it in quotation marks, that while the other preceding 6 presidents had said no, he stood up and said yes. But I think what we could say is the 6 preceding presidents had the good sense not to do this, even though Israel was urging it, and Donald Trump did not have the good sense to avoid this disaster. We have a pretty good account, as I'm sure everybody here knows, of how the decision was made. There was a meeting of Netanyahu and the head of Mossad with Trump and his team, as it were, his Secretary of Defense, rechristened Secretary of War, Mr. Hegseth, his son-in-law, Mr. Kushner, his friend and fellow real estate advisor, and now our leading special envoy, Mr. Witkoff, the head of the CIA and the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his chief of staff, Susan Wiles, not many other people. And Netanyahu came and said, this is a sure thing. One day, take out the leadership, people will rise in the streets, and the next day you'll be in charge, Mr. President. And Trump could not resist an appeal like that. What we're told in the news is that everyone else in the room either said, this is farcical, this is absurd, or grumbled under their breath. Nobody spoke in favor of it, with the possible exception. I think Hegseth probably did speak in favor of it, but nobody else did. Others said, including the vice president, I disagree, but I will support you, Mr. President. And this was the general sentiment in this small meeting. And Trump has eliminated any kind of systematic interagency analysis, feedback, or deliberation. We're in a de-institutionalized environment in the United States. We don't have rational decision-making. And normally, under our Constitution also, but normally a president would also consult with senior congressional leaders, even as a political precaution, but also to get advice. And Trump did not do that either. So I think the starting point in asking how do we get out is to understand how we got in. We got in on a completely flimsy, indeed, as somebody said, farcical rendition of what would happen, which is that you would kill the leadership that was meeting, apparently to discuss the next phase of negotiation with the United States, which was ongoing, and where the Omani mediator had said great progress was made and we will meet in Vienna the next week. So they were meeting precisely about negotiations that were now to be bombed rather than to be pursued. And the decision was taken by one person. I regard a lot of what the Trump administration does as illegal, as unwise, as unconstitutional. As I said about the tariffs last year repeatedly, and the Supreme Court finally validated that, I would say the same with this decision. So getting out is, well, in a way, it can be as easy as getting in. The United States should just stop what it's doing, which is threatening Iran and blockading, at least partially, the Gulf region and Iranian ships, and just stop what was a disastrous, mistaken, illegal, unwise operation that never should have occurred. And the United States could certainly say to Israel, we're stopping, you're stopping, period, because Israel can't do anything without the United States. And the idea that Israel commands the United States to do things is not right, although behaviorally it looks like that, because the United States at any moment could tell the Israeli leadership, no, we're not doing it, and you're not doing it, and that would be the end of it. I don't think that this should wait for any kind of negotiated outcome between the United States and Iran. I don't see that as in the works, nor do I see it as necessary. What I do believe is that the United States should end the blockade and go home. And Trump can say it was a great victory. He can say whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. Because if we continue this way, we have actually a dire crisis or an outright catastrophe, depending on how things evolve. So the dire crisis is the gradual strangulation of the world economy, which is occurring. Brent crude was at $114 a barrel late this afternoon, last time I checked. It will continue to rise if this so-called status quo or equilibrium or current situation continues. The price will continue to rise inexorably because there's a significant shortage of oil and gas supplies at this price. The betting is that somehow that shortage will be alleviated by the Strait opening, but if it isn't, the price will continue to rise and the world economy will suffer a terrible crisis. And at some point, a shooting war could easily start again in that view. If Trump were to do something even more disastrous, which Israel is urging by the day, which is a resumption of actual fighting, I would say we would be in a catastrophe, not just a dire crisis, but a worldwide catastrophe. Because at least as I understand it, and nobody has disabused me or others of this view of the thought, Iran has credible deterrence in the form of being able to blow up critical infrastructure in the Gulf in a very short period of time. Desalination plants, oil fields, refineries, pipelines, and ports. And there is no Iron Dome that's going to stop that, because there are a lot more missiles and drones than there are anti-missile systems available. This is obvious. So if a shooting war continues or resumes, it's a complete disaster, because we will be in a catastrophic long-term situation, meaning that for years there could be no recovery of the energy supplies. We're very close to that, but we're also conceivably close to this ending by Trump declaring victory and going home. And certainly everyone inside the administration in Washington, though I can't prove this, but I would say certainly everyone, with the exception of, we have a couple of dunderheads that are beyond belief. But aside from that, I'm quite convinced that everybody is telling Trump, you can't do more. And if you start the shooting again, it is a complete disaster. Netanyahu is telling him the opposite. There was a absolutely vulgar statement by the Israeli defense minister yesterday, which said that we must return to war. The irresponsibility of Israel is absolutely stunning. We shouldn't be stunned at this point, but I am still stunned how completely irresponsible Israel is in this context. So this is the basic answer. How could we get there? I have one theory which I have propounded from the start, which is that Trump listens to three people in the world, and that is your prime minister, President Putin, and President Xi, because there are four superpowers in the world: the United States, China, India, Russia, and Trump wants to be in that group. And if the other three say clearly to him, publicly or privately, Donald, stop now, don't even think about resuming the military, that would be a disastrous situation, I think he would listen. And I think it's extremely important to convey that message. The breaks will not come from inside the U.S. unfortunately. There is no institutional process putting on the brakes because we're in a one-person decision mode, which is very sad, very strange, and very dangerous. Of course, Trump is reading the opinion surveys. If you looked at the Reuters Ipsos poll yesterday, Trump's approval rating has declined to 34%, and disapproval rating, I think it was 64% maybe, I don't remember, and 2 or 4% the rest. But basically, Trump is deeply unpopular for very good reason, and will become more unpopular. And this war is opposed by the vast majority of Americans. And so there's no domestic politics in this. And if Trump is as good as he thinks he is at spinning things, he should declare a glorious success and stop and go home.
So hot off the press, as of last evening, UAE decided to leave the OPEC. What's the implication of that for crude prices or for the world?
Yeah, the UAE has, in my opinion, acted very strangely, actually, in the last few years and made a lot of mistakes. The first and the biggest is to throw its total security with the United States, which I would not recommend to anybody. Just be more careful, be understanding the world a lot better. This is not a world in which the United States leads. It's a world that the United States thinks it leads. But obviously, it's very erratic. It's very much overstretched. Absolutely, the U.S. leadership does not understand the rest of the world. And I said to the leaders in the Emirates and in other Gulf countries repeatedly, don't put all your security on the side of the U.S. They did that. That was mistake number one. Then they joined the so-called Abraham Accords, which meant that they really joined the U.S.-Israel group. And this is also very peculiar in my mind. Israel, of course, has technology, and it has military, and it has intelligence, and the Emirates joined this, which is not right to my mind. They did it with a country that is very dangerous, very cruel in its policies, and I think genocidal, in fact, in its policies in recent years. So I strongly urged against that. After the fact, I said that this was a wrong decision, and when the genocide in Gaza came, I said repeatedly, get out, at least suspend the Abraham Accords. But not only did they not do that, the news yesterday had two items. One was that they got out of OPEC, but the other is that there are Israeli troops operating in the Emirates, or that there were during the shooting phase, because apparently Israel has installed an anti-missile battery system in the Emirates. So the Emirates doubled down and tripled down on this U.S.-Israel alliance. It's not where I would be if I were the Emirates. One side you have Saudi Arabia, and the other side you have Iran. And to be unfriendly in both directions, to my mind, is not really a good idea. But they have done that. With OPEC, it's just about the opposite of what they should do. And here I did have detailed discussions with the Emirates officials over the last few years. The issue is basically the following. the world will move away from oil and gas in the next quarter century, faster than we know now. This is because the climate crisis is very bad, and it's going to get a lot worse fast. And India, unfortunately, is going to be in the front line of feeling it. Even next month or in 6 months, if we have a super El Nino, the conditions will be very serious indeed in terms of weather. And this is a truth that will be felt around the world. And so just as India, I was just across the way at a meeting with the Adani Green Group, which is making huge investments in green energy. This is going to have to be done everywhere. And so oil and gas demand will fall sharply. Believe it, it's true. It can't be, even the politicians can't stop that reality. And Donald Trump calling climate change a hoax has no effect at all, except to punish the US economy a bit. But the idea that somehow the oil and gas industry will remain central to the world energy industry is not true, because the world can't afford that. Okay, having said all of that, what can oil and gas producers then do? Well, they should understand that we're going to decarbonize the world energy system. But in the meantime, they should say, along that path of getting to near zero, the price should remain high enough that we can earn enough to shift to non-fossil fuel-based energy. So what the Gulf should be doing is saying, we are going to hold the price up even as the world demand continues to fall. It's going to go to zero, but in the meantime, we will continue to pull back supply to keep the price up as the path of demand for fossil fuel energy goes down to zero. The Emirates took a step yesterday to break that logic, exactly to reverse it, which is that as the world demand for oil and gas falls in the coming years, if there is no OPEC, the price of oil will collapse. That will be fine for India. It does not mean that you should then depend on low oil and gas for the future of energy. The whole point is to make the transformation to zero carbon. But it could be convenient, but very inconvenient for the oil and gas producers. It's a huge mistake. All of this is to say, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I do know what they're doing. They're hurting right now. The war has hurt them. They don't want to be constrained in their supply. But what they're doing is absolutely hurting themselves once again in a time horizon of 10 to 20 years. It's just a big strategic mistake, but they've made several of them now in the last few years. They are basically in direct opposition to their Saudi neighbors. They're virtually at war with the Iranians. They put all of their hopes in a U.S. defense, which has proven to be meaningless and unable to protect them. So if you ask me, does it make sense? I would say absolutely not.
Okay, moving to the US-EU relationship, there seems to be some structural permanent damage between Washington and Brussels. You've also mentioned in previous interviews that the NATO should not exist. Why should NATO not exist? How do you see US-EU relations?
NATO was formed in 1949 to defend against an invasion by the Soviet Union of Europe. And it probably should not have existed in 1949 either, because there were other ways to make Europe safe, going back to the end of World War II. when World War II ended, the Soviet Union, which had lost 27 million people in the war, said that Germany should be a demilitarized and neutral state. And if that had happened, there probably would have been no Cold War, and there would have been no NATO. But the United States and Britain immediately at the end of World War II said the Soviet Union is our intrinsic enemy, the communist system is our foe, and so we have to prepare for the next war. And so rather than demilitarizing Germany, and making it neutral, which would have been the right policy after what Nazi Germany had done, the United States, Britain, and France, which were 3 of the 4 occupying powers of Germany, took those 3 parts and formed the Federal Republic of Germany, and at the same time created NATO as a new military alliance against what had been the ally, the Soviet Union, during World War II. It should have gone a completely different way, in my view. In any event, Germany joined NATO several years later, and NATO became the defense against the risk of a Soviet invasion, and the Soviet Union formed its own military alliance with its satellite countries, so-called the Warsaw Pact. In 1990, the Cold War ostensibly ended, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the president of the Soviet Union, unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact. He said, we don't need a military alliance, we're not going to invade anybody, we don't want to invade anybody, we don't even see you as a threat, we disband the Warsaw Pact. That would have been a lovely day for NATO to announce we also disband NATO. That didn't happen. Then Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany, said in January 1990, Germany should reunify as one country. And to do that required the agreement of the 4 occupying powers, because there was no treaty that had ended World War II. So you needed an agreement, actually, of the Soviet Union, France, Britain, and the United States to reunify Germany. And the Soviet Union said, yes, we will go along with that as long as you don't take advantage of us by unifying a Germany that becomes a new enemy to us. And so an agreement was reached in February 1990 that Germany would reunify and NATO would not expand. I think NATO should have been disbanded. Gorbachev was a nice man. He just said NATO won't move to the east. And this was a verbal agreement reached, told by Helmut Kohl to Gorbachev on February 10th, 1990, told by Secretary of State James Baker III to Gorbachev on February 7th, and told by Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister, to Gorbachev also on February 7th. On that basis, the Soviet Union agreed to German reunification. When the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the United States and Germany immediately said, now NATO will expand. And Russia said, no, but we have an agreement. And the US and Germany said, no, we don't have an agreement. Anyway, it was with the Soviet Union. It doesn't exist anymore. And anyway, it was verbal. It doesn't matter. All of this is phony. It's typical duplicitous behavior by the United States of America, I'm sorry to say. It could not be more clear, the basic facts. And I got a call a couple of weeks ago from former Prime Minister of Australia, Paul Keating, who told me in detail how Helmut Kohl had told him in 1990 that the quid pro quo for German reunification was no NATO enlargement. So the US cheated. And that is why we have the war in Ukraine, by the way, without going into details. The war in Ukraine is a war over NATO enlargement. And this is a mess. And if the US government says something, I wouldn't say automatically believe the opposite, but it's not a bad rule of thumb. So if the United States says NATO had nothing to do with it and we never promised NATO enlargement, those are both lies. Outright, total falsehoods. And NATO should not exist. It became not only not a defense pact, it is basically the US military alliance. That's all it is. And the US wants it everywhere in the minds of the geostrategists. They believe that the more military bases you have, the more the US can run the world. In my view, if you happen to host a US military base, my advice is very politely suggest that they leave, because these bases are neither protection for you because they're magnets for attack, and also they ruin your national politics. So my own advice to the 80 countries that host US military bases is say thank you very much. It's also been 80 years since the end of World War II. We don't really need you here anymore. And I recommend that heartily to the Gulf countries. And in passing, I recommend to India not to be part of the Quad for the same reason. You don't need to play with the United States games over hegemony or anti-China or anything else. India is too great a power and too independent not to be part of US machinations, which are not very clever machinations to begin with. So this is my general advice. End NATO, close the military bases, end the Quad, and let's get on with the civility, decency, and peace.
Moving on to US-India.
We just were there.
India has stayed fairly quiet in the last year, despite continuous rhetoric from the US on how they settled the India-Pakistan war, 50% tariffs, more recently the Pakistan bromance, and the recent, again, hellhole comment. Countries like Spain, Canada, Brazil have all spoken out. What should India do?
India invented the non-aligned movement, which was really a very good idea. And for a country that's the most populous country in the world, and that is a superpower, and that is the third largest economy in the world, India should aim for basically non-alignment, but in today's world that means multipolarity. It means that India is one of the pillars of global stability and global peace. And it should not align with the United States, doesn't have to align with China, it doesn't have to align with anybody. It should aim to have good relations with everybody, but also not be part of anyone else's stratagem. And so this, to my mind, is the most basic point. And I think that it is achievable. The reason I don't like the Quad is that it is overtly anti-China. India should not be part of a US-led effort that is overtly anti-China. India has real bilateral issues with China, but they should be handled bilaterally. They should not be handled through the United States. And Personally, I don't believe that the issues between India and China are in any way insurmountable, because basically they almost entirely come from a line drawn on a map by a Mr. McMahon in 1914 that should not be the determining factor of the two largest nations in the world who have a lot of positive benefit through cooperation and surmounting the very real issues and distrust and outbreaks of fighting even on this border dispute should be seen as important to get on to the vastly more important bilateral relations between the two countries. So I preach on both sides of this divide. Make peace and good economic relations and good geopolitical relations. My pitch to China is that China should champion India becoming the 6th member of the UN Security Council, because we need India as a permanent member. It's one of the 4 superpowers of the world, and it needs to be there. And China should be the first to champion that, in my opinion. So when it comes to the United States, India should just keep its perspective, which is the U.S. will not be India's major trade partner. It's not India's major neighbor. It is not actually key, in my opinion, for a lot of what India needs to do economically in the next 30 years in the way that China is, because India needs a green digital economy, and cooperating with China on that, I think, would be of great mutual benefit for the two, whereas the United States isn't even trying to make a green economy right now. It's trying to do the opposite. So all the supply chains in the U.S. that involve the energy sector are the wrong supply chains. There are no doubt American partners that are very good for other things, for AI or for other things, but when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to electric vehicles in general, when it comes to energy supply, China's a much more natural partner, co-investor, joint venture operator, and so forth. The United States is in a very unsettled and erratic situation, obviously. It has delusions of grandeur that are way above reality, unfortunately, because the U.S. still views itself, I'm thinking of the Washington political class, still believes that the U.S. dominates the world, and that's why the U.S. can so easily fall into the kind of disaster that we're in this Iran debacle, because Trump believes his own press statements that the U.S. Can do what it wants and get the outcomes that it wants, which is not true. Last year with the tariff war, my advice to India was negotiate seriously and hard, but don't regard the U.S. as an indispensable market. It's not. The U.S. is about 12% of world imports. The real growth of the world economy will be in the emerging and developing economies in the next 30 years, not in the slow-growing U.S. and European markets anyway. And so there's nothing indispensable about the U.S. trade relationship. Strike a good deal. And I also said repeatedly, which proved to be right, that what Trump was doing in any event was illegal and unconstitutional, in fact. And that finally was properly adjudicated by the Supreme Court. And incidentally, the new tariff that he put on afterwards is also illegal, just FYI. Whether the Supreme Court will rule it that way, we don't know, but he used a flagrant misinterpretation or misconstrual of another piece of our legislation that does not apply. He used some emergency balance of payments claim, which when asked about it last fall when they were defending the reciprocal tariffs, the government lawyers said, this other clause doesn't apply, we can't use it. And as soon as the first one was struck down, they used what they had already said did not apply. So I think it's quite likely that this new round of tariffs will also be struck down by the courts in due time. All of this is to say, I wouldn't go out of my way to break relations with the United States. There are enough family and educational and personal and economic links for good relations, certainly at the human-to-human level and at the business level, and no doubt at a government level in the future. But strategically, do not think of the United States as the great strategic ally. This is not right. It's not right economically, it's not right technologically, it's not right financially, it's not right militarily. India is too big, too important, too powerful to be in anyone's camp in that way. And India should be championing peaceful multilateralism. And by the way, I think that's the main job of the BRICS, which I really like. And India has the presidency of the BRICS this year. And I strongly hope that the BRICS makes clear that it supports the UN, it supports multilateralism, it does not support any one country claiming that it's outside of the law. And the one that's making that claim repeatedly now is the United States, and it has no right to do so.
So Prime Minister Modi has set an ambitious vision to make India Viksit or developed by 2047. If you had 10 minutes with him in a room, what advice would you have?
Do it. It's feasible, absolutely achievable. In fact, if India continues its current trajectory, it will be achieved. So it's not something that even requires a step change, although continuing with rapid growth is itself, of course, a major achievement. So it's not something that just happens by itself. But India is on a path right now to achieve Viksit Bharat by 2047. Of course, the key to getting there is to have a good idea of where you want to go. It's not something that is just some kind of growth rate that accumulates. It is building to a targeted future. And this, I think, is very, very important. We're in a world of transformation. The world economy is changing structurally, very dramatically, obviously. The digital green economy will look very different from the economy of the 1980s or 1990s, to say the least. And so because of that, because this is structural transformation, it doesn't just happen by itself. And this endless question of the balance of markets, business, and government is very real in this case as well. And the point is that, of course, all success comes from a mixed strategy of both government and business. They have to be working together. To make that work, it seems to me the first point is to have a clear idea of what 2047 looks like economically. Well, I would say you could actually do that even quantitatively, what the structure of the economy would look like, what the energy sector would look like, what transport would look like, of course, with a lot of mistakes, but also a lot of clarity, because you can project forward if you work on it. I had an interesting experience, which I'll share very briefly. I wrote a book in 1997, which you never heard of. Nobody here. Maybe Nirupam, but almost nobody else. And the reason is the following. It was a very good book, actually. It was a very optimistic book about Asia, and it was published about 1 month before the Asian financial crisis. So it never, it was the worst time thing I ever did. And it was a book for the Asian Development Bank called Emerging Asia. And what the book was a projection of Asia to 2025 using standard growth analytics that were, I would say, good analytics as of writing the book, which was 30 years ago. And it predicted a path for China, for India, for the ASEAN countries, and so forth. And it was very optimistic. It said the share of Asia's output in the world economy will rise 20 percentage points between 1995 and 2025. Okay, the book appeared, the Thai baht collapsed, Asia went into crisis, all the memes for several years in the United States was the myth of the Asian miracle, a phrase repeated endlessly. And then the crisis ended and the fast growth of Asia reappeared. So I hadn't looked at the book for almost 30 years, actually, until about 6 months ago. And I said, I made forecasts for 2025. I wonder how they did. So I went to my bookshelf to get the book, and I couldn't find it. I hadn't looked at it for decades, so I got on Amazon, and there was a copy for $2.49, and I had it delivered, and I leafed through to table 2.8 or whatever it was, and lo and behold, I couldn't replicate it because the data that we used, that series ended in 2008, so I had to use IMF standardized data. But the share, according to the IMF, of Asia in the world economy between 1995 and 2025 was exactly 20 percentage points. So I got it to the percentage point, actually. I'm okay. And it was general principles that we're in a world where you can grow rapidly if you are behind. You can take advantage of the headroom for technology. You can take advantage of the fact that in a country with a low level of electricity, electricity has a very high rate of return for the economy and so forth. So there was no magic in any of it. It was using standard principles. So what I would say is on standard principles, Viksit Bharat can be done. Okay, but you have to then say how. And what I'm saying is you can make a pretty good assessment of what Indian economy will look like in 25 years. And the right thing to do is get all the kids in school, make sure that every child in this country finishes at least upper secondary education, expand considerably all the technical areas and university education more generally, because the greatest key for the world economy in 2047 is going to be human capital, and all of the innovation that makes possible, and all of the sophisticated supply chains and everything else that makes possible. And so I would plan for the transformations that are needed for the energy sector, for the transport sector, for the digital economy, for the land use sector, which is extremely important and very vulnerable to the climate change, because you need to build in the fact that it's going to be at least 0.5 degree Celsius warmer on average in the world in 2047 than it is right now, probably 0.6 degrees Celsius warmer. That's going to hit India hard, because it's not going to be 0.6, it's going to be a multiple of that in India. And it means water needs to be, you have to pay attention, of course, that's a perennial issue. But all of this needs forward investment strategies and planning. And this is the main thing that I would say is get that forward vision of business and government together to accomplish this, get a clarity of where India is heading, and then let business do what business can do, which is mobilize large finance and lots of talent and investing in research and development, which this country should be doing a lot more of and could be doing a lot more of, and you will arrive at mid-century where you want to be.
India is a country with ancient wisdom, but we've not been able to share all of that with the world in terms of exporting it, monetizing it, creating solutions. Would you have any advice and thoughts around that space?
I would, because this is very, very important. When India hosted the G20, it propelled basic Hindu wisdom: the world is one family, right? Even that was inspiring for everybody, and it was a great success for India. India is the home of humanity's great ancient wisdom traditions. This, of course, includes the sacred Vedas and the ancient writings, which remain the favorite stories of humanity till today, of the origins of Buddhism, of the origins of Jainism, and many other profound philosophies which have a worldwide reach. And I have been of the view in recent years that we need this wisdom desperately, and we need to take a step back from the crazy path that we're on to understand that we are one family, and to understand what this ancient wisdom bequeaths us in terms of finding a better way forward together. So I've been engaged in my own little pursuit of this since I come from the Western world. My reference point is the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and especially Aristotle, who also had a profoundly wise vision of human nature and the ability to cooperate. And he famously said, human beings are zoon politikon, political animals which know how to live within a society in a civilized way, but they need to train themselves to be civilized. That was Aristotle's main point, which is we need to cultivate the excellence of being good citizens and good people. And so I started to get together, since I'm an economist, I wanted philosophers to help me on this journey. So I brought together philosophers from of the Western especially ancient Greek tradition. We went to China, to Confucius's birthplace, which is in Shandong province. Quite amazing, since actually Confucius's homestead is the original homestead there for 2,500 years. And since he was already with followers early on, it's been built by emperor after emperor after emperor. So it's quite an impressive place called Shufu in Shandong province. So we went there, and we went to Aristotle's birthplace, which is a place called Stagira in Greece. And as we've discussed, I'm hoping to bring around 150 world-leading philosophers, including India's top scholars, and there are many wonderful world-leading scholars here, together to one of the, well, it's a place that is, of course, you know it well, but it's a unique place in the world, to Varanasi, because Varanasi is absolutely geographically the home of the ancient wisdom of